In 1995, I acquired a book, Preparation for Death. Up to that point, I had the habit of saying matins and lauds in the morning. After this, I would read something spiritual for a little while. Sometime later in the morning, we would have our family rosary here in the house. Now, when I got this book, it changed my life to the good, and that's what a good book can do. It can change your life for the good. Now, I looked at the book and it had natural divisions, and I limited myself to one division of this book per day to read and consider, as I had the habit of devouring books. You get into a good book, especially a couple books I had access. I only had 2 weeks to get at them, and so I went through them, and they influenced my life as well. And I'll get to that at some other time. So I'm preparing a list of influential books. Because, let's face it, one of the things that influences us is what we read, what we take into our mind. It influences us. It makes us who we are. And our choice of books tells us what do we truly hold to be important. And there are other things like that. Choice of entertainments, television, radio, websites we look at, etc. Everything says something about us. But I'd like to focus here on becoming a saint, because this is what Preparation for Death, it moved my spiritual life in a good direction. Partway through this book, I realized that there was a lot I needed to learn about the science of the saints. I told God that I would come back to this chapel each morning until I learned this science. And I'm still coming. Because he that perseveres to the end shall be saved. If you quit on the road to heaven, you don't just stop where you're at. It's not like you just pull over to the shoulder and park. No. The devil runs a tow truck service, and he's going to latch onto you, and he's dragging you the other way. Okay? Or else you could even turn around and rush the other way. But you are going to go backwards. Trust me. You will not stay still. You either go towards heaven or you're going towards hell. No choice. And although I've learned a great deal, there's still much to learn, for God is infinite. I cannot learn it all. There is not enough memory in this brain. I could not build a supercomputer with so much memory that it could hold everything there is to know. There would be more. Now, I read this a lot more recently, An Easy Way to Become a Saint. And we all want a quick fix and then forget it. In other words, I do this, 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 and this, man, I'm good to go. We live in an instant world. Take a look at the computer in front of me, the video camera I'm using, the light switch over there I turn on. We want it simple. We want take 2 pills and all is well. A chronic condition cannot be easily cured. And spiritual blindness is a chronic condition that we acquire over years, nay decades of wrong living, wrong thinking, wrong entertainments, wrong books. When we go to the doctor with a chronic ailment, he will prescribe lifestyle changes, which often include a special diet to be observed maybe for a month, maybe for months, a year, or even for the rest of our life. He may also then prescribe some medicines to heal the damage we have done by our wrong living. The saints tell us we must obey these prescriptions of our doctor under pain of sin. Now, if this is true in material matters, how much more so in spiritual? And the lifestyle changes may appear radical at first, but they are necessary. As I said in a recent sermon, 2 words almost a quarter of a century ago changed my life. Don't sit. And that's a long story. And don't tell the chiropractor I'm sitting right now. This was necessary for my back trouble. And if I do have to sit, then I must take other precautions. But basically, the doctor said I should either be standing or laying down 24/7. And as soon as I'm done here, I'll be up moving around to get my back straightened back out. Now, Catholicism is a way of life, a way of living, and we must live differently than we have been living in the past. In the past 16 and a half years, I've learned some simple things that I can pass along in this short video. A few things that will make it easier for you to become a saint. In fact, I consider that my easy way to become a saint. And there may be some good points in this book, but I'm going to give you some stuff I think may be a hair better. The first thing I'm going to give you is to love your neighbor. You may say, what the heck does that got to do with that? How is loving my neighbor going to make me a saint? You mean you're not going to say, get the scapular out, say a daily rosary? You're going to start off with loving your neighbor? St. John Chrysostom tells us why. He that is pious towards men is still more pious towards God. If we are not loving our neighbor, then we are not loving God. God is a God of love. In fact, some say that God is love. If we are hateful, then we are not loving the God of love. St. Teresa of Avila says that the surest sign that we are keeping the two great commandments, that is, the commandments of love of God with our whole heart, soul, mind, body, and strength, and our neighbor as ourself, which we find in both the Old and New Testaments, is that we should really be loving our neighbor, for we cannot be sure if we are loving God. So we'll start with love of neighbor. And I want you to focus on that. Do good to your neighbor. What did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? Love your enemy and do good to those that hate you. So love all men, whether they hate you, love you, do good to you, slap you in the face, call you all manner of evil, steal your goods, steal your reputation. I don't care. You love everybody. Every man, woman, and child on earth. Love. Our God is a God of love. And that's where we will start. But I had planned this video to be more of something on spiritual exercise, and was discussing this with a few other people. I said, well, put in love of neighbor. I said, man, I missed it. That's why I wanted to focus on that to begin with, because love your neighbor. Now I'm going to go back to 1995, specifically July 15th. The last day I was preparing to make the total consecration to Jesus through Mary. That's the one of St. Louis de Montfort. I had read his True Devotion to Mary, and if you get True Devotion to Mary, I want you to be absolutely careful on that. Get the old translation, because they have omitted stuff from the newer ones, and even one from the 40s or 50s I've got in my library I picked up later. I was trying to look something up and I can't find it, because it's not in there. So be sure to get the old one. I think it's Father Faber translated, because I have a nice old beat up one, notes all over it. That's the one I worked from, and I made up a plan which I followed, the 12 days and then 3 weeks, whatever. So, I was on the last day of preparation. I was going to make the total consecration on July 16th, the anniversary of my election. And so I received an inspiration from Almighty God to go and make a holy hour that evening. After cleaning up the dinner dishes, I did just that. This changed my life, because I soon began making more holy hours. And I adopted soon a habit of a weekly holy hour. And more recently, I was inspired to take up the practice of a daily holy hour, which I began a little over a year ago. And so this is my first recommendation of spiritual practices. Spending an hour a day to be with God. What I have done is simply stretch my accustomed morning prayers to an hour or longer. So I am in the chapel about 5:45 to 6 in the morning, and our rosary here before Mass begins at 7. So all told, many mornings, by the time I get done, with my hour with God, rosary and mass and thanksgiving, I have given God a tithe of my day, that is 1/10 of my day, before I even get to anything else, because that is, I believe, it's important. We've got to start our day off right. If you don't start off on the right foot, it's like the old saying, getting up on the wrong side of the bed. Well, if you don't start your day with prayer, you're toast. That's not really part of this video, but that's another thing to think about. Always start with prayer. And there are many other things I could list, other practices I do. But I want to focus myself on 4 basic ones. We had love of neighbor, an hour a day with God. So what's required for a holy hour? Because that's what we're making in essence. There are 4 things. God, you, an hour, and silence. That's all that's required. Now, especially in the beginning, I recommend having a spiritual book along, like you got this one, to give you something to think about during that hour, especially when you're first trying to acquire this habit of a daily hour with God. Now, an hour a day may be a little bit much at first. So at least, if you want to save your soul, start with a weekly holy hour, and then a quarter of an hour each day the rest of the week. Slowly expand that quarter of an hour to a half an hour, then 3/4, then finally get to that hour a day, because I think that hour a day is important. Now be ready. This is God's hour, and He may lead you elsewhere than you had planned on going, because you may have, you've got your books queued up, like I want to read a little bit from True Devotion to Mary, a little bit from St. John Eudes' Kingdom of Jesus and Christian Souls. I got Preparation Death from St. Alphonsus. I got a little read from there. I'd like to meditate, whatever. I remember one morning, this years ago, I had all my books queued up, and I was ready to go. I knelt down to say my opening prayer, and then God hit me with something else. So I pursued that thought throughout the rest of the hour, because it's God's hour, not mine. It's not your hour, it's not my hour, it is God's hour. So let Him guide you. True, be ready in case He's not speaking that day, because He might speak through another way. As happened to me later on. I was reading along, I had St. Gregory the Great's Regula Pastoralis queued up. And I'm reading along, and I'm reading, and I realized as I read something, a way I was dealing with a certain problem, I was doing it absolutely wrong. God wanted me to do something different. So I finished the chapter, I set the book down. I got down on my knees and I said, God, I hear what you're saying. I ask your patience to figure out how best to pursue what I know you want me to do. And then after the hour, I got to work on it. Because God speaks to us, but He speaks to us in silence. When we come to Him, we clear our minds for an hour. And that's why I say an hour. Because we need to step completely away from the distractions of the world for a notable amount of time each day. What's one of the things we pray for in the Rosary? We pray for detachment from the world. We need to actually do that. We need to detach ourselves daily from the world for at least an hour. And I say at least an hour because, you can go longer if your responsibilities will allow it. And I'm not going to go into responsibilities except to say, complete them, please. Now I would like to go to Jeremiah, because I remember when I read this, I forget, it was a long time ago when I read the prophet Jeremiah. I think I read it straight through. And when I hit these words, they really spoke to me. Many pastors have destroyed my vineyard. They have trodden down my portion underfoot. They have changed my delightful portion into a desolate wilderness. They have laid it waste, and it hath mourned for me. With desolation is all the land made desolate, because there is none that considereth in the heart. Now, when I read this, what really hit me is, with desolation is all the land made desolate, because there is none that considereth in the heart. And it immediately hit me. Nobody is meditating. Nobody is pursuing the practice of mental prayer. I realize that the lack of daily meditation in Catholics caused the great apostasy. Think about it. Lack of meditation caused the great apostasy. There's a lot more in those two verses, and that I could do a whole video on that, because there was years later when I reread it and I read the rest of it, like, wow, I got something out of that. So I resolved to beef up my own meditation. Okay, I was reading Preparation for Death. Maybe not been Preparation for Death, maybe another one of St. Alphonsus' works. He quotes this very quote, and he says, all of the spiritual authors tell us that if we want to become a saint, meditate. That's what he says in essence. And I said, yeah, I knew that's what it was about. See, God will guide you. If you want to save your soul, meditate. Why? These same spiritual authors, St. Alphonsus, other saints, anyone, they tell us that we'll either give up sin or we will give up meditation. So salvation is extremely simple. You want an easy way to become a saint? You don't need this whole book, although he mentions meditation. Not powerfully enough, I don't think, because I don't think you can get powerfully enough. I'm probably going to be too weak. But if you want to save your soul, meditate daily. You want to go to heaven, meditate daily. You want to become a saint, meditate daily. You want to have a happy life, meditate daily. And that is on spiritual things, obviously, because you already meditate. Yes, you do. It is simply a matter of taking a skill you already have and you use and applying it to your spiritual life. I'll give you some examples. Let's say you are fixing a car motor. All right, you're mechanically inclined and you like to tinker with the car, and you get it running finally, but it still just doesn't sound right. You're listening to it, and something is not right. About that time, the wife calls you to lunch. So you go in, and while you're eating lunch, you're still thinking about that motor, and then it hits you. I didn't do that. I didn't tighten this bolt. I didn't do that. So you go out and check what you think you identify as a problem, and you find that yes, that's it, and you fix it. You fire up the motor, and that sounds right. What did you do during that lunch? You were meditating about what was wrong with that motor. Okay, now let's go into the kitchen and the cook who is preparing dinner. Okay, you ever cooked? I do. You follow the recipe, and then what do? You taste it to see if you're getting the desired results. Taste it. This needs a pinch of salt, so we put it in a pinch of salt. Or it needs another splash of wine, so we put another splash of wine in. Whatever you think it needs, okay? And then you may even leave for a while and think about and return to add a little something else. And like as it's something, let's say it's something cooks over hours and simmers, whatever. You come out, man, it's just not quite right. What are you doing? You're meditating about the recipe and the desired result. In fact, a good cook can take and read a recipe and decide if they wish to prepare it or not. Would my family like this? Or would they not like it? Okay? Or, there's a good idea here, but no, it needs a little something. What they're doing, they're meditating. Okay, I make wine. And in my early days of winemaking, I got a book on winemaking advising you what to do, and they said, now, we advise you to take a taste at each step. And you start out in the big fermenter, which is a big plastic jug with a cover and an airlock. Okay, said when you siphon it from there to the big glass carboy, they call it, a big jug, 1, 3, 5, 7 gallons, whatever, usually. And you siphon it in there and you fill it up. Take a taste and see what it tastes like. Say, yeah, it's probably going to taste lousy. But if you keep tasting, you'll get an idea, and you'll know as you go through the process, when you finally get to the end, you remember, yeah, that tasted lousy, but you got some ideas about it, okay? And on through. Because I remember one batch of wine, and when I went from the plastic fermenter to the carboy, I tasted it, I go, oh man, is that good? What are you going to be when you grow up? It was good, and it was excellent. It was one of the best wines I ever made. Okay, but how do I learn these things? I meditated on them. Okay, and now if I can do this in secular things, and I can, you can. All right, building a computer. All right, if you build computers, I work on computers. And all computers messed up. I think about it. Okay, so you meditate. So you're meditating now. All right, in your daily life. It is simply thinking about spiritual things and fine-tuning your spiritual life as you do the car, the recipe, the wine, whatever. Spiritual books will help you get started, such as The Art of Prayer, which I believe is one of the best introductions to prayer. Okay? As I was going along, I've read, I'm thinking 50 to 75 books on the subject of the spiritual life. On prayer, whatever. And I know someone said I hadn't studied enough. Well, I agree with them on that one point. I have not studied enough on the spiritual life because I'm still above ground. I still can see, so I can still read. But I count up the number of books, then it was north of 40, and I stopped counting. I thought, okay, there's nothing to that one. So when The Art of Prayer came along, and I began reading that, I said, this is probably the best summary of what I've read over the last it was about 13, 14 years. Yeah, because I got that in 2000 and about 12, 13 years, 2007, I think. I said, this is probably the best summary, the best place to jump off from. Now, I'm not saying anything against the writings, the saints and stuff. You need to read all them too eventually. But this gives you a good summary, a great place to start off. So, the second essential in this video of becoming a saint is to meditate daily without fail. Find a method that works and just do it. Now, I'd like to go into another book, The Devil, which is a fascinating book. And I'd like to read. Now, dear readers, we must conclude. The misfortune of most men is that they know not how to conclude. They hear a discourse, they read a book, and go to their business or their pleasures without having asked themselves, what is the result of this in relation to my personal conduct? What is the warning that Providence now gives me? If you're watching this video out of mere curiosity as to what Pope Michael is going to say, what's the fool up to today, then this video is useless to you. You might as well shut it off. And curiosity is what leads to my final recommendation, and this is going to be a shocker to some of you. Give up television. Now, you don't have to haul the TV out and shoot it with a shotgun like a friend of mine did. Yes, he actually did in the late 90s. However, most of us who have television spend far too much time adoring at the silicon god. I could write a book on the evils flowing forth from what my father nicknamed the Satan box. In fact, I have one part way assembled. But let's go into a few simple facts. All right, I'm going to ask you to think about something before I go on with my first fact. When I told you to spend an hour a day in prayer, did you think it was excessive? Think about it. Because I did a survey on this. I mean, it's not a scientific survey because I had, 5, 10 replies. I forget. I think at least 10. I got to look it up. The thing is, many people thought asking an hour a day was excessive. Even half of my group that I queried thought an hour a day was excessive. The average American spends 4.5 to 5 hours a day in front of the television. Now that's excessive. Even if you spend that hour a day in prayers, I'm recommending giving 4 to 5 times as much to the Satan box is insane. It is insane. There is very little useful on television and very much that is harmful. which is why it is best to simply shut it off and use it only when necessary. Okay. I did a sermon on this. If I spend 5 hours a day in front of the television, adoring before the silicon gone, the tubes, well, the transistors, whatever's inside there now, and I spend an hour a day with God, what am I saying? God, TV's 5 times more important than you are to me? It's a matter of simple math. What is more important to you? Is God or television more important? If you have a television, you have that hour. In fact, you probably have several hours. In that same sermon, I asked people to give up television. I gave them this simple thing, 4.5, 5 hours a day they're wasting in front of it. And I said, take one of those hours you recapture, give it to God. The balance, give it to places where it probably should be in the first place. I'm presuming most of you have a family. You've got parents, you've got children, you've got brothers and sisters, whatever. Do you ever spend any quality time with them? Parents, if your teenagers are going south, going wrong on you, is it because you haven't spent any quality time with them? Are you so plugged into the tube or to the computer even? I mean, this is a useful video. When you get done with this video, shut it off. Go talk to your spouse. Go talk to your children. Go find out what's going on in your household. Spend a week without the television. Okay, and spend your hour a day in prayer. Spend the rest of the time just going around your house seeing what's going on. You might learn something. Okay? I'm not going to be able to go into all the reasons why I say give up television, but I gotta touch on a few. I recently read that in the early days of the church refused to baptize comedians until they had given up their profession. Now, the only reason I may refuse baptism is for habitual mortal sin. Therefore, comedy at that time was considered a habitual mortal sin, and comedians habitual mortal sinners for providing it. Look back at the comedies you have watched on television. How many are objectively mortally sinful? It might be easier to count up the list of those that aren't mortally sinful. Let me think a minute. Would you like to hear the list again? I would say every comedy series crosses the line into mortal sin eventually. Some of them live across the line in mortal sin. And that's why I could write a book on it. Because they cross it on the 6th and 9th commandments. I'm not going to go into details. They recommend divorce. Now they're laughing off homosexuality. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Okay? So, that's one reason I say give it up. Just give it up. I'm going to go to another area where people don't consider. And I'm going to probably spend some time here. St. John Vianney says, for the irreverent mentioning of the name of the Lord, even when done thoughtlessly, they had to live on bread and water for 7 days, and if the sin was repeated, for 15 days. This is when there were time of public penances. Do we not also sin if we listen to blasphemy? If you came to my YouTube channel, I blaspheme regularly, would not be a sin on your part to keep coming? It would. So I try to be careful of what I say on this YouTube channel, what I say in my sermons, what I even say in my daily speech. Okay? I'm not even going to give you examples of blasphemy. You know what they are. Television is loaded with blasphemy. I recall when it was a little bit less loaded. We're talking about 25, 30 years ago. I adopted the habit of making an act of reparation every time I heard a blasphemy on television. Okay? Now, sometimes, they would happen, you're not expecting it. Okay, like, it could happen, let's say I need to watch the news tonight, and, they're interviewing a man on the street. Blasphemy is going to pop out. Jesus, Mary, Joseph, I love you, save souls. Immediately come down. Shortly after I made this resolution, a movie came up on television. There were so many blasphemies in the first 5 minutes I could not follow the storyline, so I left the room. I was just going, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I love you, saves. Well, Jesus, Mary, and but, well, you know what the heck's going on? I'm out of here. Blasphemy is a mortal sin. I'm going to say that again. Blasphemy is a mortal sin. In your catechism, there are 9 ways of cooperating in mortal sin. Look it up. One of them is by silence. One of them is by just silently letting it go by. O Lord God Almighty, forgive me my many sins of letting blasphemy go by. That's another reason to give it up. And what I say of the television applies here to YouTube, on the computer as well. We've got to be very careful. Now I'm going to switch over to Super Bowl 46, which I did not watch. Prior to my giving up television, I have not watched. I watched a little bit of Super Bowl 45 because there's someone else here who wanted to watch a little bit so he could say to his family he watched a little bit. Okay. I'm glad I didn't watch 46, although I don't have a habit of watching the halftime shows. When I did have the television habit, and yes, it is an addictive habit. It's a habit of sin. And I could go into long details. I could write a book, and I'm writing it. But I want to go into this one. The halftime show was actually a satanic ceremony. Think about it. And I think I just saw something today. I didn't put it in here. The Grammys, they did one over there too. Satanic ceremonies openly on television. And if you watch closely, the doctrines of devils permeate television, especially in the fictional section. It is disgusting. It is dangerous to the faith. It is sinful. It's got to go. I've been meditating upon this. I gave up television completely almost a year ago. I mean, I wasn't watching much before that. I've been cutting it back. But I gave it up almost a year ago, and I've been thinking about it. It's just now starting to come through my daily holy hours. We need to purify our mind, our heart, and our soul. And how can I purify my mind, heart, and soul if I keep taking in the manure from television? I should have brought a bowl of ice cream. It wasn't a fast day on making this. I might have brought a bowl of ice cream and set it down right here in front of you. And then brought a bowl of manure. And got out a spoon. Say, all right, how much manure is acceptable in that bowl of ice cream? If I put 1 scoop of manure and stir it in a bowl of ice cream and hand it to you, you're going to eat it. Then why do we take in tons of manure from media? It's insane. Give up television. Now, the doctrines of devils, I have seen it. Because I remember after I read Pashinni the first time, I started noticing the New Age doctrines permeating, and we're talking about television. I was watching them in rerun, but we're talking about television from like, well, shoot, this occurred 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So we're talking television older than that, all right? That was being replayed, and I'm seeing this stuff, and I'm like, wow. That is the New Age apostasy being taught to people, and we take it in hour after hour after hour. I mean, do the math what 5 hours a day is. I didn't bother doing it for this video. It is a long time. And even if that 5 hours was not objectionable from the content, it is objectionable from the waste of time. Okay? And there are many other reasons why to give up television. Books have been written on. And I'm not talking about just spiritual books. I'm talking about secular things. There's a website that recommends giving up television. They're totally from secular viewpoint. If pagans can see it, why can't we? So I'd like to just review the practices. First of all, before entering the practices, I said, what should you do? Love your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, you'll forward him this video. Yes, you'll forward him this video. Love your neighbor. Now, there are many other practices I could be talking about. But these 3 practices that I'm going to review will help us take up the other little practices that will help us become saints, because my set of little practices won't be yours, and yours won't be the man down the streets, okay? But we all need to have these things, these little practices that help us keep on the path of sanctity. But these are 3 big ones, and these are 3 important ones. An hour a day in prayer. 1 hour, 60 minutes, 3,600 seconds. Give God that hour. And it's best to have it all in one spot if your responsibilities will allow it. Meditate every day. And this can be done during your hour, okay? Meditation during the hour is very important, okay? So you can put your meditation in your hour, okay? I'm not going to say an hour and then add a half an hour meditation. The saints say meditate quarter to half to an hour a day. But above all, never let a day go by without meditation. Why did I say? Because all the spiritual authors say you will either give up meditation or you will give up sin. You want to become a saint? You got to give up sin. It's got to go. And I'll be doing a sermon on that soon, explaining a real good reason why we've got to will to give up sin, including venial sin. And it'll be something for you to meditate about in your hour. Then finally, give up television. Hour a day in prayer, during which you meditate, and then give up television. From this will flow a pious meditative rosary every day. Now, I think that should be outside of your hour in my book. Now, maybe at first you have to put it in, but I separate it out. Okay? I do my hour, then I do my rosary. Morning and night prayers will flow from this, because we will open and close our day with prayer, because we'll start realizing God is the most important thing in my life. Prayers before and after meals, other pious practices, all which are part of a pious life. And I could enumerate the ones I do. Now, I've read about others, okay? And they're all holy, they're all pious. We need to pick those, like we should have, a menu, a cookbook of our pious practices. Now, certain things have to be in all cookbooks, okay? There's certain basic things that are in every basic cookbook. Others are not in every cookbook. All right? You've got Mexican food, you got Chinese food, you got American food, you got French food, whatever. But I mean, there's some basics to it. So, we need to have our spiritual cookbook. And as we're doing our spiritual reading, and that should be part of our hour, be time spent in spiritual reading, because it's the spiritual books, especially in these times. Jesus said, let he who reads understand. So read so to understand. Okay, but by these 3 means, our day in prayer, during which we meditate, and giving up television, we will purify our mind, heart, and soul, and thus begin on the road to sanctity. Now, by persevering to the end of our life in these practices, and purifying ourselves, and working to become a saint, we can truly hope for eternal happiness in our true home in heaven. We can find an easy way to become a saint. It takes some work, but I'll tell you what. If we even left aside the eternal benefit of eternal happiness in heaven, the happiness you gain here on earth from these 3 things will be worth it. But then you add in heaven, I think you'll agree with me. After you do this for a while, you'll be very glad you watched this video, and you'll be very glad you adopted my advice. And with that, I ask you to pray for me, a sinner, that I persevere to the end. And I will pray for you that you will take up these practices and start on the road to becoming a saint. Because you will never become a saint if you don't start. And when's a good time to start? Now is the acceptable time, according to St. Paul in the Scriptures. Don't put it off to tomorrow. Start on it now. You get done with this video, go pull the plug on the TV for a week. Your life will change. You'll find that hour you'll be able to start meditating. Your life will change. And I hope I have brought you something that will change your life for the better. I hope I have taught you an easy way to become a saint.